Chapter 26. The First Newspaper. When I told the king I was going out disguised as a petty freeman to scour our country and familiarize myself with the humbler life of the people, he was all afire with the novelty of the thing in a minute, and was bound to take a chance in the adventure himself. Nothing could stop him. He would drop everything and go along. It was the prettiest idea he had run across for many a day. He wanted to glide out the back way and start at once, but I showed him that wouldn't answer. You see, he was billed for the king's evil, to touch it, I mean, and it wouldn't be right to disappoint the house, and it wouldn't make a delay worth considering. Anyway, it was only a one-night stand, and I thought he ought to tell the queen he was going away. He clouded up at that and looked sad. I was sorry I had spoken, especially when he said mournfully, "Thou forgettest that Launcelot is here, and where Launcelot is, she noteth not the going forth of the king, nor what day he returneth." Of course, I changed the subject. Yes, Guinevere was ever beautiful, it is true, but take her all around, she was pretty slack. I never meddled in these matters, they weren't my affair. But I did hate to see the way things were going on, and I don't mind saying that much. Many's the time she had asked me, "Sir Boss, hast seen Sir Launcelot about?" But if ever she went fretting around for the king, I didn't happen to be around at the time. There was a very good layout for the king's evil business, very tidy and creditable. The king sat under a canopy of state. About him were clustered a large body of the clergy in full canonicals. Conspicuous both for the location and personal outfit stood Marinel, a hermit of the quack doctor species, to introduce the sick. All abroad over the spacious floor and clear down to the doors, in a thick jumble lay or sat Scrofulous under a strong light. It was as good as a tableau. In fact, it had all the look of being gotten up for that, though it wasn't. There were 800 sick people present. The work was slow. It lacked the interest of novelty for me, because I had seen the ceremonies before. The thing soon became tedious, but the properties required me to stick it out. The doctor was there for the reason that in all such crowds there were many people who only imagined something was the matter with them, and many who were consciously sound but wanted the immortal honor of fleshly contact with the king, and yet others who pretended to illness in order to get a piece of coin that went with the touch. Up to this time this coin had been a wee little gold piece worth about a third of a dollar. When you consider how much that amount of money would buy in that age and country, and how useful it was to be scrofulous when not dead, you would understand that the annual king's evil appropriation was just that river and harbor bill of the government for the grip it took on the treasury, and the chance it afforded for the skinning of the surplus. So I had privately concluded to touch the treasury itself for the king's evil. I covered 6/7 of the appropriation into the treasury a week, and before starting from Camelot on my adventures, and ordered that the other seventh be inflated into a 5-cent nickels, and delivered into the hands of the head clerk of the king's evil department, a nickel to take the place of each gold coin, you see, and do its work for it. It might strain the nickel some, but I judged it could stand it. As a rule, I do not approve of watering stock, but I considered it square enough in this case, for it was just a gift anyway. Of course, you can water a gift as much as you want to, and I generally do. The old gold and silver coins of the country were of ancient and unknown origin, as a rule, but some of them were Roman. They were ill-shapen and seldom rounder than a moon that is a week past full. They were hammered, not minted, and they were so worn with use that the devices upon them were as illegible as blisters and looked like them. I judged that a sharp, bright new nickel with a first-rate likeness of the king on one side and Guinevere on the other, and blooming pious motto, would take the tuck out of the scrofula as handy and a nobler coin, and please the scrofulous fancy more, and I was right. This batch was the first it was tried on, and it worked like a charm. The saving in expense was a notable economy. You will see that by these figures. We touched a trifle over 700 of the 800 patients. At former rates, this would have cost the government about $240. At the new rate, we pulled through for about 35, thus saving upwards of 200 at one swoop. To appreciate the full magnitude of this stroke, consider these other figures. The annual expenses of a national government amount to the equivalent of the contribution of 3 days' average wages of every individual of the population, counting every individual if he were a man. If you take a nation of 60 million, where the average wages are $2 a day, 3 days' wages taken from each individual will provide 360 million and pay the government's expenses. In my day, in my own country, this money was collected from imposts, and the citizens imagined that the foreign importer paid it, and it was made him comfortable to think so. Whereas, in fact, it was paid by the American people and was so equally and exactly distributed among them that the annual cost to the 100 millionaire and the annual cost to the suckling child of the day laborer was precisely the same. Each paid $6. Nothing could be equaler than that, I reckon. Well, Scotland and Ireland were tributary towards Arthur, and the united population of the British Islands amounted to something less than 1 million. A mechanic's average wage was 3 cents a day, and he paid his own keep. By this rule, the national government's expenses were $90,000 a year, or about $250 a day. Thus, by substitution of nickels for gold on a king's evil day, I not only injured no one, dissatisfied no one, but pleased all concerned and saved 4/5 of that day's natural expense in the bargain, a saving which would have been equivalent to $800,000 in my day in America. In making this substitution, I had drawn upon the wisdom of a very remote source, the wisdom of my boyhood, for the true statesman does not despise any wisdom, however lowly may be its origin. In my boyhood, I had always saved my pennies and contributed buttons to the foreign missionary cause. The buttons would answer the ignorant savage as well as the coin would answer me better than all the buttons. All hands were happy and nobody hurt. Marinell took the patients as they came. He examined the candidate. If he couldn't qualify, he was warmed off. If he could, he was passed along to the king. The priest pronounced the words, "They shall lay their hands on the sick and they shall recover." Then the king stroked the ulcers while the reading continued. Finally, the patient graduated and got his nickel, the king hanging it around his neck himself, and was dismissed. Would you think that this would cure? It certainly did. Any mummery will cure if the patient's faith is strong enough in it. Up by Astolat there was a chapel where the Virgin had once appeared to a girl who used to herd geese around there. The girl said so herself, and they built the chapel upon that spot and hung a picture in it representing the occurrence, a picture which you would think it dangerous for a sick person to approach. Whereas, on the contrary, thousands of the lame and the sick came and prayed before it every year, and went whole and sound, and even well could look upon it and live. Of course, when I was told these things, I did not believe them, but I went there and saw them, and I had to succumb. I saw the cures affected myself, and they were real cures and not questionable. I saw cripples whom I had seen around Camelot for years on crutches arrive and pray before that picture and put down their crutches and walk off without a limp. There were piles of crutches there which had been left by such people as testimony. In other places, people operated on the patient's mind without saying a word to him and cured him. In others, experts assembled patients in a room and prayed over them and appealed to their faith, and those patients went away cured. Wherever you find a king who can't cure the king's evil, you can be sure that the most valuable superstition that supports his throne, the subject's belief in the divine appointment of his sovereign, has passed away. In my youth, the monarchs of England had ceased to touch for the evil, but there was no occasion for this diffidence. They could have cured it 49 times in 50. Well, when the priest had been droning for 3 hours, and the good king polishing the evidences, and the sick were still presenting forward as plenty as ever, I got to the feeling intolerably bored. I was sitting by an open window not far from the canopy of state. For the 500th time a patient stood forward to have his repulsiveness stroked. Again those words were being droned out, "They shall lay their hands on the sick," when outside there rang as a clarion note that enchanted my soul and tumbled 13 worthless centuries about in my ear. "Camelot, weekly hosanna and literary volcano, latest eruption, only 2 cents, all about the big miracle in the Valley of Holiness." One greater than kings had arrived, the newsboy. But I was the only person in all that throng who knew the meaning of this mighty birth, and what this imperial magician was come into the world to do. I dropped a nickel out of the window and got my paper. The Adam newsboy of the world went around the corner to get my change. It is around the corner yet. It was delicious to see a newspaper again, yet I was conscious of a secret shock when my eye fell upon the first batch of display headlines. I had lived in a clammy atmosphere of reverence, respect, deference, so long that they sent a quivery little cold wave through me. And so on and so on. Yet it was too loud. Once I could have enjoyed it and seen nothing out of the way about it, but now its note was discordant. It was a good Arkansas journalism, but this was not Arkansas. Moreover, the next to the last line calculated to give offense to the hermits and perhaps lose us their advertising. Indeed, there was too lightsome a tone of flippancy all throughout the paper. It was plain I had undergone a considerable change without noticing it. I found myself unpleasantly affected by the pert little irreverencies, which would have seemed but proper and airy graces of speech at an earlier period in my life. There was an abundance of the following breed of items, and they discomforted me. Local smoke and cinders. Sir Lancelot met up with the old King Aragravance of Ireland unexpectedly last week over the moor of South Sir Balmoral le Mevious's hog pasture. The widow has been notified. Expedition number 3 will start it out the first of the month on search for Sir Sagamore le Desirous. It is in command of the renowned Knight of the Red Lawns, assisted by Sir Percent of Indy, who is competent, intelligent, courteous, and in every way a brick, and further assisted by Sir Palmedes the Saracen, who is no huckleberry himself. This is no picnic, these boys need business. The readers of the Hosanna will regret to learn that the handsome and popular Sir Charnelay of Gaul, who, during his 4 weeks' stay at the Bull and Halibut, this city has won every heart by his polished maneuvers and elegant improvisations, will pull out today for home. Give us another call, Charlie. The business end of the funeral of the late Sir Dalliance of the Duke's son of Cornwall, killed in an encounter with the giant of the knotted bludgeon last Tuesday on the borders of the Plain of Enchantment, was in the hands of the ever-affable and efficient Mumble, Prince of the Undertakers, than whom there exists none by whom it were a more satisfying pleasure to have at the last sad offices performed. Give 'em a trial. The cordial thanks of the Hosanna office are due, from editor down to the devil, to ever courteous and thoughtful Lord High Stew of the Palace, third assistant V.T. for certain saucettes of ice cream, a quality calculated to make the eye of recipients humid with great erd, and done it. When the administration wants to chalk up a desirous name for early promotion, the Hosanna would like a chance to suggest. The Demoiselle Eileen Dewlap of South Astolat is visiting her uncle, the popular host of the Cattleman's Boarding House, Liver Lane, this city. Young Barker, the bellows mender, is home again, and looks much improved by his vacation roundup by the outlying smithies. See his ad. Of course it was good enough journalism for a beginning. I knew that quite well, and yet was somehow disappointed. The court circular pleased me better. Indeed, its simple and dignified respectfulness was a distinct refreshment to me, after all those disgraceful familiarities. But even it could have been improved. Do what one may, there is no getting an air of variety into a court circular. I acknowledge that. There is a profound monotonous about its facts that baffles and defeats one's sincerest efforts to make them sparkle and enthuse. The best way to manage, in fact, the only sensible way, is to disguise repetitiousness of fact under a variety of form. Skin your fact each time and lay on a new cuticle of words. It deceives the eye. You think it is a new fact. It gives you the idea that the court is carrying on like everything. This excites you, and you drain the whole column with good appetite, and perhaps never notice that it's a barrel of soup made out of a single bean. Clarence's way was good, it was simple, it was dignified, it was direct and businesslike. All I say is, it was not the best way. However, take the paper by and large, I was vastly pleased with it. Little crudities of a mechanical sort were observable here and there, but it was not enough to make them amount to anything, and it was good enough for Arkansas proofreading. Anyhow, and better than was needed in Arthur's day and realm. As a rule, the grammar was leaky and the construction more or less lame. But I did not much mind those things. They are common defects of my own, and one mustn't criticize other people on grounds where he can't stand perpendicular himself. I was hungry enough for literature to want to take down the whole paper at this one meal, but I got only a few bites and then had to postpone because the monks around me besieged me with so eager questions. What is this curious thing? What is it for? Is it a handkerchief, saddle blanket, part of a shirt? What is it made of? How thin it is, how dainty and frail, how it rattles. Will it wear, do you think, and won't the rain injure it? Is it writing that appears on it, or is it only ornamentation? They suspect that it is writing because those among them who know how to read Latin had a smattering of Greek, recognized some of the letters, but they could make nothing out of the result as a whole. I could put my information in the simplest form I could. It is a public journal. I will explain what that is another time. It is not cloth. It is made from paper. Sometime I will explain what paper is. The lines on it are reading matter, not written by hand, but printed. And by I will explain what printing is. 1,000 of these sheets have been made, all exactly like this, in every minute detail. They can't be told apart. Then they all broke out with exclamations of surprise and admiration. 1,000? Verily, a mighty work, a year's work for many men. No, merely a day's work for a man and a boy. They crossed themselves, whiffed out a protective prayer or two. Miracle, a wonder, dark work of enchantment. I let it go at that. Then I read in a low voice to as many as could crowd their shaven heads within hearing distance, part of the account of the miracle of the restoration of the well, and was accompanied by astonished and reverent ejaculations all through. How true, amazing, amazing. These be the very haps as they happened in marvelous exactness. And might they take this strange thing in their hands and feel it and examine it? They would be very careful. Yes, they took it, handling it curiously and devoutly as if they had been some holy thing come from some supernatural region, and gently felt of its texture, caressed its pleasant smooth surface with lingering touch, and scanned the mysterious characters with fascinated eyes. These grouped bent heads, these charmed faces, these speaking eyes, how beautiful to me. For it was not this, my darling, and was now this mute wonder and interest a homage, a most eloquent tribute and unforced compliment to it. I knew then how a mother feels when women, whether strangers or friends, take her new baby and close themselves about it with one eager impulse, and bend their heads over it in a tranced adoration that makes all the rest of the universe vanish out of their consciousness and be as if it were not for that time. I know how she feels, that there is no other satisfied ambition, whether a king, conqueror, or poet, that ever reaches halfway to the sense of the summit, or yields half so divine a contentment. During all the rest of the seance, my paper traveled from group to group, all up and down and about that huge hall, and my happy eye was upon it always, and I sat motionless, steeped in satisfaction, drunk with enjoyment. Yes, this was heaven. I was tasting it once, if I ever might taste it more.